All right, hello everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today. I know it's a little chillier, so I appreciate you really taking the time and we're hoping we don't have any rain on us. So we're Sustainable Broomfield. We're a local nonprofit, and our goal is to just help everyone live more sustainably. So our website has a lot of tips and helpful hints and places you can go for more sustainable lifestyle stuff. So if you want to eventually come up with your phone, you can just scan and access our website right there. We also just recently developed a zero waste guide. So if you're like, oh, I got this thing and I want to not throw it in the trash, I'd like to maybe try to recycle it or donate it or something, where can I take this thing? We tried to really compile a good resource list for you, so if you want to check that out on our website, that's just a new feature that we have. And then the last thing here, if you want to check it out later, is Ridwell is a hard to recycle materials pickup program. So it's a curbside service. They come, I think, every once a week or something like that, but they are just launching in Broomfield right now. So you can sign up, get on their wait list, and they'll tell you exactly when they're starting to offer all of their services. And they take things like plastic film and light bulbs and batteries and clothing and stuff like that. So those are all things that you're like, I don't know where to recycle this. They will take it. So it's a new cool service that we have. So we are going to do a composting presentation, but we're actually going to start in the garden with Butter. Butter is the Crescent Grange President, and she kind of manages and runs everything in the garden. So we're just gonna kind of hop up and head over there and let her tell us all about it. Thanks. So I'd like to introduce Butter again, and these are not actors. These are actually real Grange garden members here today working in the garden. So this could be you.
Did you have a chance, Brianna, to talk about the Grange itself?
Not really. I just said you were the president, and I would love if you could tell them more about it.
Yeah. How many of you guys have even heard of the Grange? Yay! Oh my gosh, somebody's heard of the Grange. So it's a national organization, and it was founded to support the rights of farmers. And our building was built in 1916, and it has been standing in this very spot ever since then, which makes it the second oldest building in all of Broomfield. So it's a really magical place. We still use it as a rental home, a place that's a community center for all of us. So if you need a rental for a party or any kind of event that you're having, we've got a capacity of just over 100 in there, and it's beautiful. It looks just like kind of what I imagine old schoolhouses to look like, that has the beautiful wood floor and a very cozy feeling inside. So not all Granges have a garden attached to them. We're fortunate enough that when this property was bought, it was a double lot. And that was actually to keep it away from the railroad. So that was strategic, to keep it away from the railroad. So we've been blessed to have this beautiful space, to have a community garden. And to be honest, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like the garden is the heartbeat of the Grange. We get most of our new members through the garden. We have a lot of classes and community events that happen out here too. So it's been in place for about 15 years that we can tell. I've been here for 7. We don't have any evidence that this was ever a victory garden, but we're still researching and trying to find out. But we don't really know how this space back here was used through the early part of the history of the Grange. But yeah, about 15 years ago, a group decided that they wanted to have a permaculture garden in this space, that it was really important to have a garden that is run on the principles of permaculture, which talk about protecting the people who are working in the garden, protecting the land, and being better to the land than it was found. So when we're gardening out here, we're always thinking about how do we build the soil, how do we build the space, how do we make it greener. And we do have a lot of long-term plans for this space. Eventually, we'll have landscaping across the back, 3 layers of trees back there. We're working on building up our fruit orchards, so we really want this space to be enclosed in like a great big green hug eventually.
What do you guys do with like the extra fruits and vegetables that you guys get?
That's a great question. We actually, so you know, I think these days that most community gardens, you have your individual plots, right? And you can see that this space operates differently. This is a communal space. So every one of our volunteers shares the work in this space, and we also share the food in this space. And you would think, when I first started here, I thought, well, how does that work? How does everybody get their fair share of food? And the funny thing is that every year we have more food than we know what to do with. It's really a beautiful system. We have great soil out here. So because we've got excesses, we're very dedicated to sharing with Fish Food Pantry. So every year we donate hundreds and hundreds of pounds of fresh produce to Fish. And that's part of the reason why we have our washing station there, so that we can wash our produce and then just run it across the street. You guys have all been to Fish, right?
Oh yeah.
So it's super nearby, and we get to support them, and you know how it's set up like a little grocery store in there, and our produce fits right in, and it's always welcome. And we've got a good partnership with them too. Like Fish lets us take their cardboard boxes a lot of times. So a lot of what happens out here happens through a community partnership. For example, have you guys toured the Scraps yet? So in addition to the Compost Club, we've got Scraps Composting, which is a paid subscription service. So you pay a monthly fee and it will take a broader array of compost. I'm sure Brianna will talk about that later. But because they're using our property, they also help us out. We're going to be building a fence in 2 weeks, and we need all the help that we can get. So the people from Scraps are going to be helping us with that. Let's see, I've lost my direction here. So yeah, we have, this is a communal space, and we have the 3 main beds. So that's a scarecrow bed, and I'm sitting in Zhang's bed, and then the 3rd one over there is named after one of the garden founders, Marcy. And we consider these our main beds, and every year we rotate our crops through the 3 beds. And again, that's to make sure that we're protecting our soil, that rotating your crops, you're not constantly taking the same nutrients from the soil, you're not spreading the same disease with the same plants year to year. So that's part of how we protect the soil. And we also have, if you see over there, we've got our medicine garden. And over by the hoop house, we have our pollinator garden that the butterfly pavilion helped us to build. And hopefully it supports our bees. And we've got we've got several fruit trees on the property. We've got the pears about to bloom. There's a plum behind it, a crab apple. And just today, if you can see the little red flag over there, we just obtained a Colorado orange apple. Does anybody know the story of the Colorado orange? No. Okay, so it was a kind of apple that was grown in Colorado historically about 100 years ago. It dominated here actually, and it was a lost cultivar. Nobody knew where to find it, and it was only about 5 years ago that someone had been looking for like 20 years, found a Colorado orange. They were able to confirm its identity genetically, and apples can be propagated from cuttings that they call scions. So since that time, they've been spreading the scions to plant throughout the state. And we were lucky enough to get one from Widespread Malice, which is in Boulder. If you've heard of Montezuma Orchard Project, it's like that, but closer to us. It's in our part of town. So if you ever need an apple anything, contact Widespread Malice. They're a great group. So that came up on Friday. We had the opportunity to take the apple tree, and I jumped on it. Because one of the lovely things about having a big space out here is we have the opportunity to do things like that project, to support an apple tree that may go on to be important in a lot of other lives. Or last fall we obtained American chestnuts. That's another species that has been in peril. It used to be one of the dominant trees in the American Southeast, and when chestnut trees were brought in from China, they brought a blight with them, and it killed almost all of the American chestnuts. And so there are people that are regenerating chestnuts, and we received about 10 seeds of those last fall. So we're working on that too. We're able to have projects that are a little different and fun and explore out here. We also have some unique crops. We like to grow things that you can't get in a grocery store or even a farmer's market. And we have some projects that we've been working on for a lot of years, saving our own seeds. The garlic originally came from a garlic farm in New Mexico. And you can see this coming up. We plant this guy in November, and it comes up really early and gives us early season satisfaction. And then we harvest in July. And so it's kind of a full season plant because we're able to have it be part of our group work projects out here all year long. You'll forgive me, I've get a little tired. I've been sick over the winter, not COVID, but it leaves me a little worn out sometimes when I'm talking. We've also got a really important winter squash that we grow out here. It's called the no-name squash because it has no name. And that sounds funny, but it's actually important because the no-name squash has no name because it's never been sold to a seed company. It's a squash that's native to the Americas, and the native people here have been growing it, documented for 500 years, probably a lot longer than that. So by those seeds never being sold to a seed company is not making the profit from the plant that these families have been growing for all of their generations and feeding their family. And so we're helping to strengthen those crops of the indigenous people in New Mexico because we save our seeds and send them back to them. And because they've been grown here and pollinated here in just a little bit of a different environment, it helps strengthen the line. So we've got some fun projects like that too. This year we're going to be introducing temporary beans. Again, that's a native to the Americas. It's a bean that actually doesn't like to be watered a whole lot, and it'll pollinate over 90 degrees, which most runner beans won't pollinate over 90 degrees. So we're always working out here to think about how can we grow a little bit smarter? How can we adapt to what we know now, these drought conditions, the heat, the high temperatures? That's not going to change. So how do we grow out here so that we're a little smarter, a little more waterized? We're using crops that are meant to grow here, which is not to say we don't do fun things too. We grew some watermelons last year and they were a big hit. At the end of the season, we all had a work day out here and split up the watermelons, and everybody ate watermelons out in the yard. It was so fun.
Do you want to tell us what we're doing with the cardboard and stuff here?
Yeah. So our volunteers are out here today getting a jump on the weeds. We're a no-till, no-spray garden. So it's important to us to get a jump on those weeds because we don't do anything to interfere. We just try to smother them. So what we do is we put down the cardboard. After that, on goes the compost, and eventually, you can see straw in some places out here. Eventually, once the wind stops blowing, we'll put on the straw as the final layer. And that usually does a pretty good job of suppressing the weeds, but bindweed is always our problem out here. It's just ridiculous. And I can remember my first year out here, before we had this method, we'd pick bindweed out here and it would get like a carpet knee high. So the fact that we have some weeds but not as many and that we can actually see our vegetables is a really big improvement. But it's important to get it down early to keep all of us from crying from doing nothing but weeding for the rest of the summer. So we're making a pretty strong emphasis on doing that right now. Do you have any more questions, Brianna? Lead me a little.
I don't know. So, well, we got the garlic here. Do you know what else is planned for these other areas?
Yeah. So last year we had our three sisters were in the far bed. So this year we've rotated the three sisters into this bed.
And what is the three sisters?
The three sisters are a traditional interplanting where you grow corn, you grow beans to grow up the corn, and then you grow squash too. So the three sisters. And that's when we've rotated into this bed. So this year we've got garlic here, and then we'll have these are peas, and those will be our rows for our temporary beans, which, like I said, is a brand new crop for us. I grew it in my home garden last year as a tester, and they were amazing. If anybody's interested, they're a tiny bean. They look small, but the fact that they grow here, that they don't get angry with our weather, I planted maybe 100 seeds, and the bugs got a bunch of them early on. So maybe 75 plants. I got 2.5 pounds of beans, and teeny tiny little beans. So they're a great producer.
Are they bush or pole?
They're semi-bush.
Oh, okay.
So they like a little bit of support. I think they do better with just a little bit of support, but you don't have to go crazy. They're not like a runner bean. And then this year we've already got carrots and beets down over here, and that's the area that will be the main part of our summer planting. So we'll have tomatoes and potatoes, all the nightshades over there, all of our heavy summer crops will be in that bed this year. Let's see. What else do we have going on? Our raised beds are new this year. They were donated and we just got them put together, and we've got radishes, tender herbs, and lettuces growing in the raised beds. We also think because this is a permaculture garden that everybody has access to it, that everybody feels welcome here. So we really want all bodies and all abilities to be able to come out here and enjoy the space and enjoy the experience of just, you know, they say there's an actual bacteria in the soil that makes you happier. So physically putting your hands in the soil, in addition to just being outside in the fresh air and the sunshine, even in the heart of the city, that can be restorative to human people too. And that's part of what we do out here. We really think that it's important to build community, which is why I've really championed keeping this as a communal garden space instead of moving to individual beds, which would be easier to manage, trust me. But we feel really committed to creating a community out here. And we're getting back to our normal life after COVID. So in the past, we have always had a potluck out here once a month. All of our gardeners and Grange members gather together and we come to our potluck, and we have classes out here, and we try to really be a community, to be friends with each other. And I've really appreciated that it's brought me together with people, you know, what they talk about, your echo chamber. You know, I've met people here that I never would have met otherwise, and I think that's really cool. It's hard to make friends when you're a grown-up. It's hard. What else do we talk about?
Well, we've had some scouts come in and done a lot of projects for us. So we had scouts building the compost bins over there, the wood ones. We had a scout come in and repurpose all of these bricks around the garden, which used to be a silo at the Bruner farmhouse. And then we had another scout come in recently, and he built the pergola for the entrance over there and that entrance sign. And then I guess you can also see we have the kind of greenhouse area there. That was just put up by Grange members a few years ago, though, and we are still working on trying to get it utilized more in the winter and stuff.
Yeah, we're working with the county extension is making a plan for us.
Oh, great.
To put fans in there and have them be on solar. The trouble is that, like a hoop house, it'll be a lot warmer in the day, but it still will freeze at night. So we need to have a system of fans in there and also a little bit of supplementary heating in order to be able to actually grow plants in there. And you know what it's like. It was 90 degrees on Friday, and today we're all freezing. So the same happens with plants. But yeah, we really rely upon that community support to have the scouts come in here and help with the big projects. Or like I said, we're going to get a really sweet little white picket fence to put in behind the row of irises between the parking lot and the garden itself. And we'll need a lot of people to help with that. Bring in as many people as are willing to come. All are invited the weekend of the 14th and 15th. And we'll put that in together, and that'll build a lot of beautiful connectivity visually with the building, and also say from street level, hey, we're a garden. Which I think is important too, because kind of you look into the space. Well, at least when I first got here, my goodness, when I first arrived here, it looked like a vacant lot back here. The previous group that had started the garden had all kind of moved on. They had all sort of moved on to the next phase of their life, and it was kind of like the circus collapsed. And so there were weeds 6 feet tall and like tomato cages tossed around, and watching the baby steps that it's taken to get this place back to looking like this is just extraordinary. And thinking about all the people who have contributed out here. I mean, like, I think of the work that Brianna did single-handedly putting down these paths out here. Every one of us contributes to that and makes it this beautiful place that it is. And I think it just feels hopeful to me. And like it's an appropriate agricultural legacy for the Grange building itself. Because that's a big part of our history of Broomfield. Our garden can be a living history in the way that we grow it too.
Do we have any questions for Butter? Anything about the garden here?
So, we are with a scouts troop called the Navigators. We might come in sometime. would love to set up a project with you.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Great. You'll get my contact through Brianna, right?
Sure. Yeah, I will send out a follow-up email to everyone, and I will put like Butter's contact info if you want to contact her on there.
Because we've got
Grange info.
room for anybody who wants to be out here. I mean, it's a big space, and we can always use the hands. We can always use the help because there's just more than all of us can do right now. And we like to dream big for this place, but we also have to be realistic about what it takes to manage the space and actually get anything accomplished. So,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm so excited.
Awesome.
Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm rusty. I haven't given my big
It's all
tour
right.
for a while. I used to do it like once a week,
Yeah,
so I could just roll
It's been
it
like
out.
2 COVID years, right? So,
Right?
yeah. All right. Well, Butter will, I think, still be over here working a little bit longer if you have just a question for her. But I think we're going to probably head over and do our composting section. And you might just kind of wander around real quick and take a look at some of these other little pieces of the garden on your way.
And y'all can email me anytime with any questions.
Great. Thank you, Butter.
Thanks, Brianna.
Yeah. All right, folks.
To you, okay?
So we're going to start our composting section here. So like I said, we had some great scouts build us it. We had like 3 bins built, and the Grange was not really utilizing them properly. They would just throw like random garden scraps in it at the end of the year. And so I came in with Sustainable Broomfield and was like, oh, could we start like a composting program? And so I designed kind of an online registration system for people. And we said, okay, we'll just collect buckets and we'll give everybody a 5-gallon bucket to take home. And we'll tell them what we will accept and what we won't accept in terms of scraps. And we started a compost club, and we started running out of room in our compost club. We were filling 3 bins up pretty fast. And so we asked another scout who was looking for an Eagle Scout project, hey, could you build us 3 more bins? So we now have 6 bins, and we still get them pretty full. So we have about 85 people listed on our compost club membership that are, I think, participating. And they just can come by and dump their scraps whenever they want to. So this is kind of the setup that we have here. And then when you compost, you need brown material to add, and we usually just use leaves. And so I built that leaf hold last year, and we had people bring us bags of leaves, and we filled the leaf hold. So we're like, okay, we're set kind of for the year, because we always need leaves to add in here, and unfortunately they only fall one time a year, so you got to stock up.
And would the grass clippings also be acceptable?
With the what?
Grass clippings?
Grass clippings are kind of okay. So in moderation, they're okay. If you put a lot of grass clippings in there, they actually are so small that they're dense and they pack together, and the air can't circulate very well in there. So it's not a good thing to like take your entire lawnmower bag and dump it in your compost. It'll probably just stink really bad and not compost very well. So
If it's dried grass instead of
dried grass is a little bit better. Yeah, if it's more like straw-like and dried, then it works a lot like the leaves do. But you do still want to make sure it's not just one giant clump and stuff of it. Yeah.
if you didn't have enough wheat matter or grass, would peat moss be okay to start it with?
I think peat moss would be okay. I don't know how carbon rich that is, and the brown materials are really carbon rich. So we're going to go through kind of the basics, and then we'll answer a bunch of questions as we go. So first off, what is composting? And it's basically the process where people are helping to create an optimal environment to help quicken the natural breakdown of the organic material. And I do have some handouts here. So if you want to just kind of like flip through each one, the last one that has the clip on it, if you want to take one home of those sheets with you, you can. I will be emailing an e-copy of the same thing, so you can take one or not. So yeah, just feel free to look through those and pass them along as we're going here. So yeah, we're trying to just break down our organic matter in the most efficient way possible. And instead of just letting it sit out in the sun and kind of bake and stuff, we're like, oh, let's add some water, let's mix things up, let's get these microbes active, and they really start to decompose things quickly. So what is an optimal environment for composting? Basically, you need 50% green material, which is nitrogen-rich material. 50% brown material, which is carbon-rich material. It also needs oxygen, and it needs water. So it needs to kind of stay moist as a wrung out sponge is what we say. We also need bugs to help us with decomposing. So there's a lot of different types of bug decomposers out there. When you set up a bin, it's actually good to have it sitting directly on the soil, because then the bugs and microbes can come up through the soil and get into your compost, and they will, work at it and actually help things decompose a lot faster. So you want little creepy crawlies in there. That's a good thing. So people often say, "Oh, I can't compost. I don't have a yard. What can I do?" There is worm composting. It's called vermicomposting, and you can actually just do that inside. They do this a lot of times in like elementary school classrooms. So you get kind of a Tupperware bin. This would be like a real small example of it, something like that. And you can put down like a bedding material, which I think is a lot of times newspaper. I haven't actually done this at home, but from everything that I've read, you can get these red regular worms. They're kind of a special type of worm. You might order them online or order them you can get them actually on Craigslist from people who use these worms all the time. And you kind of just throw them in there and you start throwing food scraps in there, and they basically eat through it and they poop it out, and that poop, that they call worm casings, that is your compost, and it's really great compost to use. So you just kind of have to sift it and separate the worms from it. But it's kind of a non-smelly option for in your house that is possible for people who maybe live in an apartment or maybe have an HOA that doesn't let them compost. Another type is called Bokashi Composting, where it's more of a fermentation process. You have to buy this bin and you put your scraps in there, and you have to add this substrate material to it, and it all like ferments and breaks down, and it releases like a leachate, and that leachate you can then use as like a fertilizer to water plants, or you can use it as a drain cleaner because it's actually pretty strong, so you want to really like water it down if you're going to use it with plants for fertilizer. But you do end up with a fair like chunk of material, and they say then when you're done like letting it compost and ferment down to a certain point, you can take that chunk of material and just kind of like you dig a hole in your yard and you bury it in the yard and basically just cover it back up, and you're kind of set. So there are a couple indoor options that you can use, and apparently that one doesn't stink, so it's kind of cool. So anyway, if you're going to do backyard composting and you want to start doing that, the first thing you need to do is figure out what kind of bin do you want, or how do you want to compost. So if you have a lot of space like we do at the Grange here, you could have just an open pile. A lot of people do that. You can buy a bin. So these are options of kind of bins that you could possibly buy. You could even build your own bin. You maybe could make something like this. Sometimes people use pallets and they can build their bins. And so once you've got your bin set up, then you want to start building your compost pile. And the basic idea is you're going to add about 3 or 4 inches of green material. You're going to add about 3 or 4 inches of brown material, and you're going to kind of mix them together with your pitchfork and add a little bit of water to it, and until it's like as damp as a wrung out sponge, like we were saying before. And you basically just repeat that layering, mixing, watering on a weekly basis. So again, green material, this nitrogen-rich stuff, some examples are fruit and vegetable scraps, garden trimmings, coffee grounds, tea bags, manure from herbivores is okay, so like chicken poop and stuff. Brown material is dry leaves is really great, hay or straw, sawdust, shredded paper, and dried grass clippings. So those are other good options. And so then step 3 is basically using your compost. So it's ready when it's like dark brown and crumbly, and it doesn't smell sour or kind of gross anymore. And all the ingredients that you've added, they're pretty much unrecognizable. It just looks like dirt now, essentially. And you can use the compost for a lot of different things. You can just sprinkle it over any flowers or vegetables. You can, like, if you're planting in your garden, kind of dig a hole or something like that, and just kind of bury it around the base of the plant that you're putting in. Why do we compost? So when organic debris is put into a landfill, it gets buried, and so then it doesn't get any oxygen, and it's decaying anaerobically, and when it does that, it actually produces methane. And methane is a really potent greenhouse gas, and it's like 84 times more potent and traps more than CO2. Fortunately, it doesn't last in the environment, in the air, quite as long as CO2, but we still really don't want it in the air. And so all of that is kind of contributing to climate change. So the more organics we can keep out of the landfill, the better we are fighting climate change. The organics in the landfill can also create like an acidic, toxic leachate. I think the landfills are supposedly like lined, so that's not seeping into your groundwater and stuff, but it's still kind of questionable if that's working properly or not. So it is possible for it to pollute groundwater. Let's see. Compost is also, it's a nutrient-rich soil amendment that can actually help pull carbon out of the atmosphere. So when you take your compost and you put it down on your grass or you plant your tree with it, they're going to grow stronger and healthier, and they're actually going to then pull more carbon dioxide out of the air, build it into their root system, and any excess they're going to just push it basically and store it safely in the soil, a lot of that carbon. So growing things and just putting compost on your lawn or something and having a healthy section of growing area is something that's going to help fight climate change. Let's see. So it's a really good way to reduce food and yard waste. So 37% of all the waste that people throw away in Broomfield is actually compostable. So, you know, think about everything you eat pretty much, you could probably be composting this. It's kind of your natural way to recycle and extend the life. It actually extends the lifespan of landfills, so we're not filling them up quite so quickly. We can, you know, use them for longer. Using compost can help save you money. So it reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and having to purchase your own compost. You know, so if you're making it in your backyard, you're like, oh, I don't have to go buy any now. Your water bills may drop. It's actually really good for helping break up clay in the soil, and it adds nutrients back to the soil. It breaks down clay, improves sandy soils. It produces healthier plants and higher yields. It can actually help suppress weeds and pests and plant diseases. It improves water retention in the soil. It reduces erosion. And it reduces the need again for those chemical fertilizers, which are generally made with oil. So if you want to just kind of go the more natural way, compost is really the good one. I think that's kind of everything from here. Let's see.
Quick question on what you've got there.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's better to have it on the ground because then the bugs can come up and get it. So if you've got one like the one on the end, do you need to be adding worms or something to it?
I have one like that at my house. I don't specifically add anything to it, but some people will say, oh, take some like finished compost that maybe you got that has some of those microbes in it. You could add it in there. They have apparently like a compost starter that they sell at some of the stores, and I think I'd look at what's on there specifically and see if it's like, oh, this has microbes and stuff in it. You can also order some of those worms and just throw some of the worms in there with it, but you can even leave it open and let some bugs and flies and stuff get in there. You're digging in your garden and you're like, oh, pulling out worms, like throw a couple of those in there. It's all helpful. The more microbes and stuff you can get in there, the better. But that's one of the disadvantages of that turning one. But those are nice and easy to turn. So you don't have to take a pitchfork and be like, okay, I'm shoveling all the time. So there's pros and cons of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned paper.
Paper?
Yeah, like composting using paper.
You can put paper in there.
What about the printed paper, all the trash you get in the mail?
So with paper, what I would suggest, I also know a lot about recycling. If it's recyclable, recycle it first. If it's now down to the point where it's like a napkin and it's so thin that you're like, I can't recycle this, then put it in the compost. Because compost is like end of life. We can't use this anymore. Paper, we could still use it a couple more times. So that's how I recommend with that one. Shredded paper, though, you could put that in there. If you're like, oh, I have some documents I need to shred or something.
Even with the ink and everything on it, the toner on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of questionable. It depends on how much, there's a possibility of some of those, like, substances getting in there. But personally, I don't really worry about it too much. I'm like, it gets hot. It's breaking things down when it's cooking it as a compost. But yeah, there is a chance that it might affect your soil slightly. But so I would just add it pretty minimally if you did want to add it. And you could consider, like, I mean, they use like bleaching and stuff on paper, but like my husband was saying, well, the bleach is all evaporated by the time you get it and you're using it. So it's kind of something to research maybe a little more, decide. I don't know too much about it though, sorry.
So what if you have like store-bought flowers and they're past their bloom life and they're at the end of their life? Can those be composted, or would those have to be thrown out?
No, they're just fine. Any plant material you can actually throw in there. I would recommend things that have a stem or a kind of a stalk. Cut it into pretty small pieces. So I compost things like my avocado pit, but I cut it into like eighths before I throw it in there. Because if I throw a whole avocado pit in there, it comes out as pretty much a whole avocado pit and it takes forever to compost. So I try not to put sticks, larger than my pinky in there. And if I do put them in there, I'm cutting them down to like little tiny pieces. Part of it's we live in such a dry environment that we have to keep like adding water to our compost. And if we lived in the South or something where it was more humid, it would probably go a little faster and work a little better. But just because of where we live, it's not wet enough that we really get it composting quite as quickly and efficiently as we normally would. Yeah.
Just a comment. Actually, I think in the Boulder EcoCycle website, I found some information about how to help get all these mass amount of junk mail. And so you can actually add your name to like the do not.
Oh, the do not contact me list for junk mail.
Yeah, and I just spent some time like calling some place and be like, stop, I don't want your insurance.
Nice.
So that was a good service, for the
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a question about the compost itself. So let's say I have one bin, right? And I'm putting the green, the brown, the green, the brown, everything's great. It's like, in sponge, I'm mixing it. And I'm like, okay, I'm starting to pile up some, let's say inside my house. But I wonder, at what point do I not put the green material, so I won't actually use it?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a little tricky with you have one bin and you're like, okay, I want my compost now. How do I get it? You can sometimes use like a sifting screen like this. So you can take this and actually just put it over a wheelbarrow and shovel your compost onto it, kind of sift it through. The good compost is going to fall through. The scraps that are still chunks and stuff should kind of stay on top. So that's one way to kind of separate your compost. Otherwise, I just recommend a 2-bin system where you're like, let me just fill up this bin as much as I can, and then I'm now going to start filling up this system. Or you can do, they have you can do a batch method. And if you have like a turning compost bin, or either type of bin really is fine. So with a batch system, you basically try to just add a whole bunch of ingredients all at once, and then you just let it like compost, and you don't add more ingredients to it. And so you can get things like 5-gallon buckets and just put them in a garage or something like that, and just have your little bucket of scraps in your kitchen and continue adding it till it's full. Just set it to the side, let it, it's going to be kind of nasty, but keep a lid on it, it'll be fine. And then, fill another bucket or two. Once you feel like you have enough buckets, take all of them, dump it into your bin, add a whole bunch of leaves with it, get it wet, turn it, mix it all up, and then just on a weekly basis go out and mix it all up and make sure it's wet and stuff like that, and just let it break down completely till it's finished compost. And then at home keep adding to more buckets and stuff like that. So that's another.
How long do you wait until the bin is full for the compost to be used for the garden? What's a good
like these ones,
or
just in general for a garden?
General, yeah.
So what I do personally is I fill my bin up to there-ish, and it's till I'm like trying to turn it, and I'm like, I can't turn it because everything's just falling out. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to add more stuff to this because it's too hard to try and turn at this point. So then at that point, that's when I stop composting, and that I stop adding scraps to that one. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let this finish basically, and so I leave it.
How long does the finished part take?
It does. I mean, you can again do like a sifting, or you can take like a scoopful out of it. And honestly, if you're just adding it like into your garden, if it's not completely done, you can still just throw it in there. It's going to keep composting in the ground. So, you know, it might be a little more stinky when you're trying to add it to your garden and stuff like that, but it's going to keep breaking down over time. So you don't have to be like, oh God, I can't use this, I can't touch this. Like, it's just, and you can kind of, yeah, sort through and find the good stuff. And a lot of the good stuff might be on the bottom. So a lot of these have this type of thing. And so if you're doing more of the layering system and you just kind of layer and layer and layer, and you don't actually go in and like dig everything out and mix it all together from the bottom to the top, you'll probably have more finished compost at the bottom. You can just kind of go in there and scoop it out.
So the less you mess with it, the better it is.
Yeah, I mean, you do want to aerate it because it gets kind of it gets more compacted and stuff, and it doesn't get the oxygen that it needs to really do a lot of the decomposing if you don't aerate it. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Like, you should aerate it, but then if you also don't mess with it too much, you'll have more finished stuff on the bottom. So I think that there might be a tool you can use where you put it down in there and you can kind of like swirl it this way instead of bringing things up and through there. And so doing like that might create the finished stuff on the bottom, or kind of in layers as you're going through there. Yeah. Any other questions at the moment? Yeah.
So, coffee grounds,
Yep.
I know is a great thing to go in. It's just great directly,
Yes.
going directly in the garden.
Yeah, yeah.
So does it help to put it in the compost? Does it help the decomposition of the other materials? Or should you be doing the coffee grounds direct, like this time of year, put the coffee grounds directly into the garden while you're putting other greens into compost?
Yeah, I think that it kind of depends. So with greens, you're adding like a whole bunch of different materials together. The coffee grounds are nice because they're really heavy, like nitrogen-rich stuff, and so they actually help get the decomposing process really going. So, I mean, I would maybe do like half and half. Like one day I'll put it in here and one day I'll put it in my garden or something like that. Yeah, it can kind of go either way. So, and I know like in my composting bucket at home, if you add like too many coffee grounds, you're like, this thing just smells kind of nasty for a while. So it's like, maybe I'll just have a separate container for coffee grounds and not mix it in with my home like compost in my kitchen type stuff to keep them less smelly. Yeah.
It said no meat, bones, or dairy.
Right.
Why?
So if you're doing a backyard compost bin or something like this that's outside, so bones will just not decompose. So when you add all that stuff together in your compost bin and the microbes are working and stuff, it gets hot and it gets warm. And it doesn't get warm enough to actually like break down the bones, and so you will just still have bones left when you're done taking them out. So there's no reason to put them in there because you're just gonna have chunks, giant bone chunks trying to take it out. The dairy and the oils and those types of things, they will basically attract pests to your backyard compost bin, and they'll make things more stinky and stuff like that. I think it's mainly just because they attract pests, and you'll have like raccoons and stuff like trying to get in there. Whereas if you have just like fruit and vegetable scraps, it seems to keep those things away.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions at the moment? Well, if you want to, I can show you like an actual composting demonstration. If you guys want to come up and take a look here. So you can take a look there. That's kind of somewhat finished. This is finished. This is going in the garden. This is somewhat finished, getting close. You can still see a couple of things in there. You can even see we do have like trash sometimes, so we gotta watch out for that. This is the bin that is our active bin that everybody is right now adding to. So excited. Orange. Yeah. So that's the active one right there. You can look at this.
And she said this is the somewhat finished one.
So we noticed in the finish you still have some eggshells.
Eggshells are really...
Do they ever break down?
Not really.
Okay.
Eggshells are really bad. They don't break down very well. So with eggshells, you should like crunch them up and try and make them small and throw them in there. But you'll probably still notice eggshells when you're going through the finished stuff. But just throw it in your garden. Throw it along with your plant. Your plant will love the calcium. But yeah, they're notorious for not really breaking down very well. But they're not a huge like issue if they're not broken down at all.
Sell it out of everything. Just chop it everything as much as you can. Basically.
Yeah, and you don't want to go too small because again, things will get too dense and packed in there. So they say like 2 to 3 inches for a lot of things. If it's harder, probably chop it smaller and stuff like that, like an avocado pit or even the avocado peels. They're so like hard. Like I still chop mine into fairly small pieces and stuff like that. But here I can show you. I noticed I was turning this one earlier today and it was steaming. So because it's warm in there like it's supposed to be. So let's see if we can find some steam. There you go. So here, come and take a look if you want real quick. So you can see kind of the white stuff. That's mycelium, and that's what happens when it's like really been active and the bacteria and stuff are down in there, and they're building like houses and stuff for themselves.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, there's steam coming off it, so it's nice and warm in there. That's what you want. So you want it to be like steaming and warm and stuff like that. You can really place your compost bin in the sun or the shade. If you put it in the sun, you just might have to water it a little more because it'll dry out faster. But it's fine kind of in the shade too. But it's going to create its own heat. So you don't have to rely on like the sun to like create the heat for the compost to break down and stuff like that. But yeah, with this stuff you can see we have a lot of like, you know, brand new eggshell and like avocado pieces and kale pieces, whatever. Okay, and then in this one, this has been going for maybe 2 months. It's a little slower in the winter because it's so cold it can't get quite as warm and do a lot of the breaking down that it needs to. But you can still, there's a lot of like leaves and sticks and chunks and stuff in there. That first bin, it looks a lot more just kind of like black dirt, and you might see some stick pieces here and there, but it's mostly broken down into the stuff that's ready to be put in the garden. So, and usually when I turn the compost, we'll just kind of, oh here, I'll show you actually adding compost. So what I usually do is I kind of dig a hole in the middle, or really any section of it. Got my compost over here. Got like fresh compost right there. We got a lot more over here. So these are some scraps that some folks dropped off. So people are keeping them in like Tupperware containers, and then they just, you know, drop them off later. A lot of people will take their stuff and freeze it, and then when they're ready, they'll let it defrost and then put it in. You don't really want to put in like a frozen block because it'll kind of like halt all that heat that you created in there. So that's no good. So we got a couple of these. And so I just basically dump in all my bucket of scraps there.
Is that just scraps or does that have leaves in it?
That was just scraps. It had a little bit of wood chips in it because I pulled it off. It was laying on the ground a little bit. So all I do is I put in about my scraps, try and take a bunch of leaves. I try to add close to like an equal volume of what I just put in there. So I'll just throw a bunch of leaves in there, and then we'll kind of give it a little mix. A pitchfork there, and then that's pretty dry, so you definitely want to add some water. So what I usually do is my like dirty bucket, I'll take it over and I'll kind of rinse it out and then just throw the dirty water back in here. And then I'll kind of cover it up a little bit with some kind of older compost to let it get started kind of in the middle of the oven that you have created in there. And then that's basically it. And then you come back a week later and you add another good bucket of water in there and you kind of try and dig in the compost and mix everything up as best you can. So yeah, I'll try to like, over here. I really try to like dig down and try and move everything around as best I can. And yes, it can get a little stinky, but I mean, in your backyard, you probably won't have quite this volume. The little black bin, I mean, that's what I have in my backyard. I don't notice it unless I'm like standing like right over it. So my hose is like right next to it. Like I don't notice any smell just even like watering with my hose or anything like that. So these bigger ones, they get a little bit stinkier, but with the size of your family one, probably not going to be too much of an issue. Any other questions? Anyone want to try turning the compost?
I do that at home so much, so.
Yeah, I know. Like, it's not fun. I have specific gloves just for compost turning because I was like, they're always stinky and I don't want to use them for anything else. So that's pretty much it. I mean, you kind of got to plan ahead and like in the fall, collect a bunch of leaves and just be like, okay, I'm going to store a bunch of leaves in bags away for the season. And then just, yeah, get a system at home. If you can get a nice little compost bin or a compost bucket thing for your kitchen, and then you just, we'll throw the scraps in here, you know, a couple days it'll fill up, take it out, just dump it in there, add a little bit of leaves, add a little bit of water, stir it around, close it up. It takes, you know, just a couple minutes. So.
Is it okay if the leaves getting wet, or like do you want to try to leave them kind of dry, or it doesn't matter?
They're okay if they're wet. They stick together and they kind of mat a little bit more, so it's nicer when they're still dry. Otherwise, you got to kind of use your pitchfork to kind of separate them from one another. We do get on the like bottom of this, we'll have like a layer of leaves, and it's always like, oh, this is just kind of this mat of leaves that now I have to try and mix into everything else. So right off the bat, like try to mix things so you don't have different layers of just things that compact together and stuff like that.
So we have a lot of pine needles that we rake up every
I'm not really sure about.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work?
Our neighbor has pine tree. It falls to our yard. I did specifically like this side of the compost just to put what we collected from the yard. It didn't do anything for over a year, and I didn't add anything else.
But
just
all you
leaves
put
and pine needles.
Well, if you only add leaves and pine needles, that's all like carbon stuff, so that shouldn't break down. If you add green stuff to it, like the nitrogen stuff, then it could possibly break down. So
maybe sparingly.
In moderation.
yeah, I would do it sparingly. Maybe just try like a little bucket full and kind of sprinkle it throughout and stuff. I feel like it would break down okay throughout the whole like system, as long as you're not throwing a ton right in one spot.
How long will that take to break down?
This, by the time it's full, it depends on the season, kind of. So those ones were like this. We filled basically all of these in the winter, and they're pretty much mostly ready. A lot of those. This one, I would say, it'll probably be ready in like a month or a month and a half, with the temperatures that we have here and how big this is and how warm that it ends up getting. It doesn't take too long for us to really get a fair amount out of this. But here's the other thing. You fill it up to here with compost, you're gonna have about this much compost when you're done. So it really breaks down. You're not gonna, don't be like, oh, I'm gonna have all this compost. You'll be like, oh, I'm gonna have a third of my container full of compost by the end of it.
If you have a mobile composter, would you want to maybe like, put it more in the shade in the summer and like take it out more to the sun in the winter because of how cold it is, or it doesn't
what I do is in the winter, I have one that's gets direct sun all winter, and I keep it there because I'm like, it needs the sun to try and keep it warm. In the summer, yeah, I'll use my more shady one and my sunny one, but the sunny one dries out really fast. So it's like I'm constantly having to add water to that. So yeah, in the summer when it's warm out, I would say shade is totally fine. But in the winter, the sunshine one might be a little bit better for that. Yeah. All right. You guys sick of the compost smell yet? All right. Any other questions or anything? Also on our website, we have a whole composting page. So it has a troubleshooting guide. And actually, let me just give you a few little tips from the troubleshooting guide.
Would you be able to email this one too? Because this one was
This is on the website. So yeah, I think it's a link to like Boulder County backyard compost. I think it's backyard composting workshop. It should look just about like that. It's a PDF file. So composting troubleshooting. Bad odor or rotten smell. Cause too much moisture. So turn the compost, add more dry materials. Bad odor, ammonia smell. Too much nitrogen compared to carbon. You have compacted leaves. You have inadequate airflow. So add some high carbon materials like straw, sawdust, wood. Turn the compost. A lot of it's like turn the compost, add more water, add more leaves. Like one of those is probably the solution to your problem for most of these problems that you come across. So yeah, you can check out this troubleshooting guide that I find kind of handy when you're like, okay, this isn't working for this reason or this other reason. All right. Well, I think we're gonna call it good with the video. So thank you guys, and we'll do our little raffle thing now.